Thank you for joining us for this week's edition of Afternoon Intersections, where we connect God's Word to everyday life. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Afternoon Intersections, where we seek to apply God's Word to everyday life. We want to welcome everyone here that's joining us for this edition or for another broadcast. I know we haven't been on for a couple weeks, but we're glad to be back with you on today. And we have an exciting conversation in store for you today, particularly as we think about everything that's been happening in our world. And this week, we want to see how the Bible helps us to relate to those things that have been happening. And so we just want to welcome you. Of course, you know, you're welcome to post questions or comments in the chat. We'll make sure that we do our best to answer them or include them in our broadcast. Well, what I'd like to do is take just a moment on right now to bring on some of our panelists for today. And I want to bring back some of them. You already know, I want to welcome Andrew Reed with us today. He has been with us before, and we're so glad that he's able to join us. We also want to welcome Sister Danae Gator. Also been here. It's been a while since she's been with us, but we're so glad that she's able to be with us. And for the first time, we have Robert Hammond. He's going to be with us today for the first time. And so we're so excited to have them with us. We may have a couple other panelists to join us. I'm not sure if they'll make it, Robin and Carl now. If they do, we'll be sure to include them in this conversation. I don't think you guys want to say just hello, wave, smile. I don't know. All right. Again, I just want to let you guys know that you can not only, post your questions or comments in the chat. You can also dial in to this number or text this number preferably, and we'll try to include any comments that you may have. And so we just want to have a word of prayer, and we're going to dig right into our topic today. Let's bow our heads. Father, Lord, we want to thank you so much for your goodness towards us. We ask that your spirit would guide our conversation today. May our hearts and lives grow. May those who are listening and watching, whenever they will watch this broadcast, that their hearts and lives would be changed as well. And so give us your spirit. This is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, I want to just begin, for those of you who may not have watched our worship service today, just to kind of have a little bit of context in terms of what we're talking about today. We're talking about holy fear, and really our starting text was in Revelation chapter 14. And I just want to read just a couple verses there. Then I saw another angel flying in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach to those who dwell on the earth, to every nation, tribe, tongue, and people, saying with a loud voice, fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment has come, and worship him who made heaven and earth, the sea and the springs of water. And I just want to just for one quick moment here, explain fear in the Bible. We're not talking about terror or to be afraid of God. That's not the context there. The word that fear is, fear God is have awe for him, have respect for him, to allow him into the heart so you can have a relationship with him and have a deep appreciation for his love and his goodness and his character. And so when the Bible there is saying, hey, fear God, is really saying love him, allow him in, put him in, esteem him in his rightful place. And so that's kind of the context in which we're going to explore this topic today in terms of holy fear. And we really want to shape it in the context of what's been happening in our country. This week, we witnessed the verdict of Officer Chauvin for the murder of George Floyd. And so we're waiting for his sentencing. And so I just want to just begin this conversation with our guests here today. Just as you were watching that, that verdict, or, what were your thoughts leading up to the verdict? What were your apprehensions? Did you feel like he was going to be acquitted, or were you sure he's going to be guilty? And then when you heard the actual verdict, what happened in your mind? How did you process that moment? I don't know who would like to go first, but you're welcome to jump in.
For me, I was kind of nervous about, actually I was very nervous about, what the outcome was going to be, just because we know the history of how, police officers have not been found responsible. They've not been responsible for their actions. And so, on one hand, I was thinking that same thing would happen again. But I know in those moments leading up to the, actual verdict, I was, I had a sense of heaviness, in my heart and in my stomach. I felt sick. And so, once they, made the decision, that he was guilty on all 3 charges, I was relieved, but like you said in your message, at the same time, I was, my mind just went back to everything else that has happened, in previous days, in addition to that current day. So, yeah, I was relieved temporarily.
Okay. Hold that thought. I want to bring in our other guests here as you guys get ready to come in. We want to welcome with us Robin and Carlin Alfred. They're able to join us today. We're so glad to have you. If you've been able to listen thus far, we're asking the first question kind of, hey, what were your thoughts leading up to the verdict of Officer Chauvin? And what were your thoughts afterwards when you heard the news? And so we just heard from Danae, and we want to open the floor up to who would like to share their thoughts on that.
I think my feelings were all over the place. I guess there was like a little bit of hopes, like, you know what, maybe they might do the right thing and there might be conviction based on all this evidence. But then I was like, oh, like Danae said, we had all this evidence. But I think one of the best ways to kind of describe how I was feeling was that SNL skit a few weeks ago where they were actually portraying about how you've seen how all this evidence there and it's still possible that he might not get a conviction. When the guilty verdicts came, I guess I wasn't relieved, because I guess my thing was I was more so, okay, you can be guilty, but then the real measure would be exactly how much does the judicial system deems like of you in terms of sentencing. So I was looking at it, it was slated to be like over 70 years in prison if everything went to the maximum. But then looking at the presumptive stuff, it was like up to like maybe 29 years. So I'm like, okay, so we have anywhere from no time to 70, to over 70 years, and they're like saying, you know what, maybe 29 years. So I guess right now I guess my anticipation is tempered a little bit, just because I guess to me, we'll see that measure of justice will come when it comes out to sentencing. And then I guess kind of feeling the same way like what the DA was saying, is like there really was no justice, because when you look at justice is restorative, and then in this aspect, like it's hard to like see like where the restitution will come from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what I hear you saying, that you'll really see where this goes in terms of the sentencing, if if it's meted out fairly for you. Anyone else like to weigh in?
Yeah, I'm old enough to remember Rodney King. And so that's all I could think of leading up to the announcement of, the judgment. I watched Rodney King almost live get beat almost to death. And I remember those 5 officers walking out of the courtroom fully acquitted, and the smug look on their faces. And I remember feeling stupid. Like, I must be stupid, because I sat here and I watched 5 men, 20 minutes beat a man half to death. And they got off. And even though it's 2021, when I watched George Floyd be killed on video, all I could think of was Rodney King. So even though the evidence was overwhelming, we were able, because of technology, we were able to see it with our own eyes. And even though we weren't there, we know what we saw. You know what we saw. They know what we saw. Everybody saw the same thing. I was not confident that we would get all 3 counts. And then after getting the 3 counts, I didn't feel like celebrating, because I was like, why are we celebrating something that should automatically happen? I mean, that's not celebratory. Celebration would have been another officer intervening and George Floyd being alive today for whatever justice would be. That would have been worth celebrating. Even with if the sentencing is going to end up being between 12 and 15 years by the book, because he'll be able to serve these concurrently. They've already said it. So your 40-year term, your 25-year term, and your 10-year term will all be served concurrently. He has no criminal record prior to this, so that automatically reduces it again. And then there have to be outstanding circumstances in order for the judge to add to those to those timelines. So we're starting out at 12 to 15. In my mind, I wasn't celebrating anything.
Wow.
This is what should have happened.
Yeah. I don't know, Robert, you want to weigh in here a little bit? I can't unmute you. So yeah.
Oh, that's fine. I had multiple feelings about this. It was interesting to understand as the progression of these cases over time. Yeah, you had Rodney King, but that was such a long time ago compared to the electorate we have now, which is definitely younger, and a lot of people, I guess, under 40 or under 35 may not remember it as viscerally as those that are older. So the recent things we've had to deal with in the media and in our culture with Black Lives Matter and justice with Black people is related to, you know, all of the people that have gotten off. And there's the quick succession, you know, multiple people who've gotten shot without any type of accountability. Philando Castile, Trayvon Martin, just tons of people, Sandra Bland, just tons of people that have just hadn't had any accountability for their deaths. And the underlying theme is there's a narrative in America that allows for us to, and not necessarily us, but for certain Americans to say that was bad, but that was unacceptable, however. And as long as you allow the narrative to have an escape, you're going to see these people get off. And what I thought was brilliant from the defense, the prosecution was, they stopped all of those other avenues from escaping. They were able to get, medical professionals, the number one pulmonologist in the world. They were able to get police officers and to take other colleagues and say that this was wrong. They were able to talk about the spark of life defenses that were able to say that this was my visceral experience with this. So you're taking emotionally, if you're a fan of the police, if you're talking about the law, you are wrapping them up to say that we're tying up all of these loose ends so that if you feel convicted in portraying whatever belief system you have, you don't have to portray those values. You can still convict and still believe the way you have. And so with that in mind, I had confidence that he might have gotten at least one or two counts with conviction. And if not, the worst that we likely would have seen was kind of like a mistrial where you would have a hung jury. I definitely would not have expected like complete acquittal, right? So I had confidence that there was going to be some type of, acknowledgement that this was not right. But there was never, and even now, not a sense of this is more than just a bad apple. This is more than just a one-off, which is how we were able to get this. We're not able to get this to say that the system is wrong that perpetuated this. We're able to say that this one individual in this one instance did this one thing. And I've had that feeling before the trial, had that feeling during the trial, I had that throughout. And yeah, the sentencing, like you said, is definitely going to give us, starting around 12 or 15. The prosecution is doing another 7 extenuating circumstances to lengthen that up. We might have more than 15 years, but even still, I mean, you took the life of an individual that America doesn't seem to be on the same level as others. So therefore, the consequence of that is not going to be as high. And that is that narrative that is still perpetuating before, during, and now after has not been corrected. And therefore, I wasn't surprised by the verdict. I didn't feel good at the verdict. I didn't feel a sense of warm or fuzziness as I wanted to, but it just didn't really hit me well.
Yeah. It is interesting, leading up to it for me, I had a range of emotions. I was anxious. Then I thought about what if he got off, I was angry. And then watching, I thought the prosecution did a phenomenal job of really reframing the conversation. But what troubled me, I remember I was on Instagram and one of my friends was talking about the trial and he posted something. And then someone posted in the chat, basically an alternative argument buying into what the defense was saying. This was before the verdict. And I remember thinking like, wow. So someone is literally buying that perspective. They actually believe the defense's perspective. And that created a sense of anger for me and worry. And then when I heard the verdict, like you guys, it was just like, okay, good. But I became very much aware that this is a systemic problem, that while this was a good decision, that this does not necessarily stop it from ever happening again. And people having to be held accountable for that, Yeah. So,
Pastor,
go ahead.
I want to bring something out very quickly. In order for us to get the result that we got, there were beyond outstanding circumstances that had to happen for us to get the result that we got on something that should have been obvious and a slam dunk. Mm-hmm. The initial prosecutor, the local prosecutor, was a mess. It may not have even gotten to trial had it stayed with the local prosecutor. It took petitions. It took celebrities like Jay-Z calling the governor to pull in Keith Ellison, the attorney general, who put together this phenomenal team. And when you look at who Keith Ellison is and his track record, he's like in the top 10% of attorneys in America. And then they had to go outside of their budget to get the the number one pulmonologist in the world and 45 witnesses and pull it together. That is not how it's going to be going forward. That mammoth effort that it took to get something that my kids could have convicted, right? As my brother said, on a one-off. That's the result of the result. Mm-hmm. And that part of it gives me trepidation. Like, the marching and the protests absolutely had an influence on the jury prior to this. Had an influence on me, right? Mm-hmm. And so all of that had to set up in order to get to where we are today with that judgment. But when you look at the bones of it, it's like that intense the effort that was put together, almost on a historic at a historic level. It's not something that's sustainable across the board for justice for us across the nation.
Yeah. And go ahead, Robin.
Oh, I was just going to say, and I know I've been hearing what everybody else has been bringing out about how they felt about the verdict, but this is how I felt about the verdict. I got the text from Carlin, and then I actually talked to him as well. But I know on my drive home, thinking about it and knowing that this happened, my thoughts went back to slavery. My thoughts went back to how a Black man was considered 3/5 of a human. And, what did that, I was driving home wondering, did that spark anything for people saying that with this verdict, does this, actually mean that for a moment in time, did justice prevail in that sense, that somebody lost their life and that was kind of considered, this is a human being who lost their life. I also thought about the courage of the people on the street to even tape it. Some people, there's been shows that says like, what would you do? And they have video cameras showing things happening and what people do. Some people, could have just frozen. You think of the police and you think of being scared to do anything because they might arrest you for doing something. But I thought about the courage of those people to do that, because if that video wasn't taken, then we wouldn't be where we are now to have that. And the other thing I was thinking too is how when they were showing different things about his family and his daughter was saying, my daddy changed the world. And I was just thinking about all those things because all of these things happened as a result of that. So all what happened because of his death and what it sparked in people all across the nation, that was something that even we're not where we need to be, but it gripped everybody's, it gripped everybody to say, like, this is something that we're moving towards, we're doing something. So I just felt a lot of different things, but I I know that what everyone has said, we don't know how this will turn out, but it just kind of takes you back to who you are and what happened to our ancestors and what does this mean, and just hoping that this momentum is not lost in that moment. And then we had so many things happen the days after, like a succession of all these other things that were happening in our world with unfortunate circumstances for our people. So that's just kind of what it sparked for me.
Yeah, it definitely did. And I think it does cause you to think about your place in America, as a Black person. Could this happen to you? I think we all know, based on what we've seen, this could happen to any of us, any traffic stop. And I think it's interesting that, like Carlin said, it took this amount of evidence, of video. If there was no video, would we have gotten to this place? If they didn't bring all these people to bear on this situation, would we have been here? And even with all of the mountain of evidence, we couldn't be sure that the gentleman would be, convicted. I think one of the things, as we kind of segue to another thing, I think that stood out to me in the trial, I think what the prosecution did, when they showed, Chauvin's view from his body cam, and he talked about this idea of the indifference. He defined the indifference of the officer to the life of George Floyd. And I'll never forget the image of him while George Floyd is saying, "Hey, I can't breathe." And Chauvin picks out a piece of gravel out of the tire track of the car, of the tire, and just throws it on the ground. It's like, to me, in that moment, that pebble in the tire mattered more than the life of the person that he was kneeling on. And I could not help but think about what brings a person to a place where they have just such a complete disregard, right, for another person's life, right? Which kind of leads me to this idea of fear of God, right? This idea that for you to do that to another person in that moment, God has to be absent from your heart and mind to be able to do that, right? And so what we see here in the Bible, in Revelation 14, this idea of this final warning message of calling people to this acknowledgement, this back to God, to who he is, his power, his love, his identity. And do we see that as a critical piece? Is it relevant today? This call to regard for God? Do we see a correlation with what we're seeing happening in our world? And does that call have any impact? Does it resonate in any way in your minds? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that, but I think it goes hand in hand when we're talking about America. I'm not talking about global. We're talking about America and its abusive relationship with the African American community. I believe that it goes hand in hand, the lack of the fear of God. But we're talking about a lot of these people that feel this way are Christians or claim to be Christians, but they don't view us as fully human. So it's easy to look, they don't view us as fully human. So it's easy for them to look God in the face, so to speak, go to church and feel okay with the way that Black people are treated in America, because we're not fully human. I don't have to answer to God. I don't have to fear God on that.
I'll challenge you on that, because
let him finish on, Andrew, and then you come on. We'll get to you.
The reason why I say that is because there is a whole group of people, millions of people, and I'm being politically correct here. On one side, who preach every Sunday. I'm going to open this can up about abortion, because they view that they preach that what is inside of the hood is human. And so therefore it invokes these feelings of, we've got to answer to God if we don't save these unborn humans. But to this week, literally on Facebook, I had an intelligent acquaintance, I'll call him, refer to criminals as animals. And therefore, if they get what they get, you get shot dead acting like an animal, then you get shot dead. So don't act like an animal. And that's what many of them think of us. And therefore, they don't fear God about the consequences of treating another human like a human if you don't feel like that person is fully human. They like Robin said, we're 3/5 of a man on paper in this country for a number of years. It's been just a little over 60 years that we've had all of our rights. I'm the first person born in my family, born in the United States, with the right to vote. That ain't ancient history. My dad served in Korea fighting for this country without the protected right to vote. We were not fully Americans, fully human in the eyes of over half of this country for the longest time, and still today, which makes them say, I don't have to account to God for that. It's unconscious. I'm saying it's unconscious. Makes it easier to treat to go to church and say, I've done everything that I can to love my brother man, because that's not my brother man, because he's not as smart as I am, not as good as I am, not as valuable as I am.
Yeah. And I'm gonna let Andrew weigh in, but I would challenge that notion that, do they really know God? Are they really Christian? Because biblical Christianity does not disregard anybody as half human. So which Bible are they reading? So you can say that. So we think about that with the Jews. They were religious and orthodox, and they did all of those things, but yet they murdered Jesus, right? Yet they were lost, right? So that's a version of Christianity that's not real. That's not Christianity, what they're doing. And they don't get a pass because of that. Because if the gospel demands that every person is created in the image of God. And so I would say it's no fear of God in their eyes. You can profess fear, but the evidence that is real is seen in how you treat other people. That's the litmus test of whether or not what you're saying is real and is being lived out in your life. Go ahead.
I meant what I'm saying. I'm saying professed Christians. Okay, go ahead.
Okay,
go ahead.
so
I'm not disagreeing with you either.
So I guess
I hear what you're saying.
sorry. Yeah, I guess it's not a full challenge, but because you kind of said some stuff I wanted to say. So I would say it's a distorted view that they have of the fear of God, because they will look and admire all of his creations. But then as you're talking about the animals, I remember what happened with Michael Vick, and people are calling for the crucifixion of Michael Vick. As much as we all know about the rumors of Ray Lewis, he was still playing. So just even to say that, minorities are viewed as animals, I wouldn't even say they even view it as that, because animals were treated better. You look at a dog in a bad way, animal control's gonna be calling you so quickly. So, and I think it's this distorted view of what God's creation is and what they want to assign value to. And I think when we start challenging this concept, this is what is human. All of us are human. We all bleed. You want to take it back to science, or genetic code is very, very similar, to one another. A few differences that separate us from each other. But until we start pushing back, it's you know what, we are human. I think I've got to a point there where it's until people start dying like us and say, if we want to live like them, and that things will change.
Yeah. No, I hear you. I don't know if anybody else wants to weigh in on that thought.
So I'm going to somewhat disagree, I guess, with the premise. The problem that I see with the policing and the issue we have in this country is definitely rooted in racism, and it has a big racial component. But I think it's not really defined by race. Because you have people who are from many different backgrounds who are in the police force who will do crazy stuff and do things that are inhuman to other people, in the sense of, I think that I'm saving my community. And this is, I guess, rooted in what you were alluding to, Carlin, that criminals are not considered to be human. And therefore, we should not extend the level of human protection to criminals in general. And so I agree with you on that sense, that our compassion for people who we deem to be accused of a crime, not necessarily convicted of one, and then how we treat people once they're convicted of a crime, whether that conviction was fair or just, is completely different from a person we have not given that scarlet letter to. And until we as a community start to look at people who have transgressed against the social contract of our community, and we start seeing them in a more brotherly, sisterly light, I don't think that we are invoking the love of God in general. And sure, we can look bad at the police for doing things, and yeah, they do crazy stuff and things we shouldn't, right? But when we look at other people who have done things wrong in the Bible, we are fine with the persecution or the killing or doing things wrong based in God's name. And in that sense, the people who you've given the religious evangelical or whatever idea, we have taken that license from what we have given scripturally, that this we can go and we can kill and we can do these things with impunity because there are times in the Bible that God has given us this charge. So therefore, the action of itself is not wrong, but how we do it is what we should abide by. And so there's that narrative of people who've done wrong and people who have messed up can receive this type of treatment. They can receive this type of respect. And that's kind of like how we kind of do this like duck and like shuffle with our internal narrative so that we can justify ourselves into doing the things that we feel we want to do. So yeah, I definitely think there's a racial component, but I don't think I think it's beyond race. I think it is beyond the respect of our brother and our sister, whether they've been labeled as a criminal or not, and the things that we allow our society to do to people who we have deemed to be transgressors of our community law.
Okay. Anybody else want to weigh in there?
So I just want to, I want to put a small caveat there. And I'm not arguing with you. I will say this though. It hasn't been that long. Like I was in another conversation this week. And so you obviously know where policing started. Slavery patrols, right? You know, and I'm not going to go through the whole lineage, but if you start somewhere around civil rights era, right? Community policing started with the Black Panthers because only 6 of the policemen on the force out of 600, were abusing the Black community. So when you look back at the pictures, who was turning hoses on our people for wanting to vote? Who was releasing dogs on our people wanting to march? Who beat John Lewis over the head for wanting to march peacefully protest? I mean, who beat up? When we go down, there's a rooted and racial component. Those people aren't dead. The training officers who trained those people, though elderly now, are still alive. And so those training methods are pervasive. So you can end up with a Black cop in a Black community, but has been trained to treat the Black body differently than the white body. And so the criminality, when it comes into play, you're absolutely right. This has to do with the love of God and humanity. And so taking this back to the George Floyd ruling, this was a ruling about humanity, not about race. It was a ruling as to whether or not George Floyd was a human. You know what I'm saying? Not whether or not he was a Black man. But absolutely, I think we are shading in a different way if we don't believe that somewhere down the line, Derek Chauvin's relationship with the Black community was less than equal to that of the white community. And there's nothing anybody can say that would make me believe different.
Yeah. And part of my question there is, what's the root cause? You know what I mean? I think there are a lot of contributing factors to, racism, how we're brought up, what our exposure is to people. And if we're taught that a certain human being is less than, but what causes that kind of perspective, and how is that rooted out? You know what I mean? And I guess, and of course you can use, and I would say it's a misapplication of the Bible, in terms of to justify this type of hate. We can, with those people, we're taking the Bible out of context and what that means. And so I don't think that even if people are using that as a license, it's a misapplication of what the gospel of Jesus Christ really teaches, So I think that part of my question is, what's the root of this and what is the response? And I think I want to talk about it in 2 levels, right? So I think that there is there's a practical response. So what would happen if people in the world had this type of regard for God, right, in their mind? How would that impact policy and practice and policing in America, right? Now, at the end of the day, I think it goes to a heart issue. But then what are some things as people who care about the image of God in humanity? How do you deal legislatively or with the community, in terms of bringing about or enacting change? Because I think that fundamentally, engaging from that perspective that God has created each person uniquely in his image and died for them to be saved in eternity. I think that engaging in that way, people who are filled with that perspective are able to impact systems and lives in a more profound way. And I guess my question is, what do we think that looks like, and how does that impact, public policy, policing, et cetera, in America?
I'm going to say that you're going to have 70% well-informed voter participation of your community.
One more time.
You have at least 70% well-informed voter participation. I mean, we can talk about different, things that we want to see done or happen. But when we're talking about a democracy here, if I'm going to consider you to be an equal member of my community, and I love you just like a brother and a sister, assuming that you have good relationships with your brothers and sisters, I would suspect that you would want democracy to play out, right? I think that you would want the community to have an input. If we're going out and we're going to go out to a restaurant, right? If I don't respect the people or the opinions or the palates of my friends, I'm not going to ask them what they think we should eat. I'm just going to say, hey guys, we're going to eat here. But if I respect what they say and I want to have a good time and they're part of my friend group, we're going to get together and say, hey guys, what do we want to eat tonight? And when you allow people to come in and provide their perspective on an equal footing as other individuals, then that respect will then yield to a sense of connection, and that sense will yield to a sense of protection to that other people. Because if I am asking for your opinion, I think that that would then relate to your voting, your participation in the system, and then the policies and laws will fall from there.
So how do we get there in your mind, where people respect other people?
70%? Oh, or respect. I don't know what you mean.
Say that one more time.
How do we
my
get
connection?
to
I'm sorry.
70% participation in voting, or how do we get to you said involving others? I guess what is your question?
Yeah, you were talking about, when we get to a place of respect for other people, and how that would impact voting. So how do we get to a place of respect for other people in your mind?
I
Perspectives
think,
and values.
Right. I think how do we, I don't know how we're going to get to actual respect level. I think the best way we could do is to have people first involved against the opposition that is there to involve people. Once you have people talking in your community and contributing in your community and investing time, energy, and resources in your community, even if you don't respect them, that someone will at least have to acknowledge you. And once you acknowledge my presence, then the long-term effect should be respect. It's kind of like with God, right? Like someone who doesn't have a relationship with God, the idea is you're to read your Bible, to pray, and through time, your love will grow. And I think the same thing is with people. If you don't have a connection with your neighbor, when you participate in the voting process, you participate in how your laws are governed in your community, and you have at least 70% of that threshold covered, then you're going to have to acknowledge their existence. And by acknowledging their existence, you will then grow to respect, I think, to some level of who they are.
Okay. So what I hear you saying then, is relational, building relationships in the community by involving people with people of different backgrounds, engage in a process of change, will help foster community and respect, possibly. Would you say that? Because I can have my perspective and be engaged in this initiative, but not be changed by how I fundamentally see you. You know what I mean? I may work to, hey, we're trying to, for example, when the tornado hit Nashville. So you had people from all races working together to alleviate that, right?
Right.
Does that mean how I see you as a person has changed? How do we put that perspective?
Right. The only reason why I say is 70% voter participation is actual concrete changes that are taking place. When you have people that are actually voting on concrete laws, that is what would make a difference. That's how you have like actual tangible things. Okay.
All right. Go ahead, Carlin. You want to jump in?
All right. So the caveat here is this is going to sound incredibly self-serving, but you're going to have to believe me as your brother that it's not. When I ran for mayor of Nashville in 2018, I put together a comprehensive community policing plan. One of only 3 that was put together by the 13 candidates who were running, and it was one of only 2 that was actually endorsed by the Fraternal Order of Police. And where it started for me is we have to put a demand on the profession of policing on the fly. We all know that it started and rooted and based in racism. And you can say what you want today, like it's different people today, blah, 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 blah. The system works perfectly as it was built to capture and arrest Black bodies en masse and put them into the prison system for the purpose of hired work. Okay? It hasn't changed. Okay? That's why the sentencing is different from us. These are just statistics. This is not even opinion. Why we get 5 times longer sentences for nonviolent crimes. So where we need to start is we're not going to retool the entire system. In other words, tear it down, start from the bottom up, which is not realistic. We're not going to do that. We need to place a different value on being a policeman. So one needs to be more training, right? Needs to be better training. How can I tell a criminal in the hood? I don't even live in the hood, but I can tell you walking down the street who the Black criminal is and who they aren't. Why can't you tell as a Mr. Policeman, right? So that also means that we need more representation from our own communities in law enforcement. So in doing so, we do need to raise the wages of a police officer. You know what a police officer makes? You know what I mean? It's almost like, why are you doing it in the first place? And I believe that there's a correlation between attracting those who have other reasons, not just a calling for public service. And that's a lot of them, because I have cousins and uncles who are sheriffs and stuff like that. I had lunch with a U.S. Marshal the other day, right? There's a calling and a special person that takes it. There's also people who have been marginalized and look at it as a way to get authority over another human being, right? And so what gets them up in the morning is the ability to be able to tell you what to do. So what we need to do is recruit more from the communities that are being over policed so that they can be policed by the people who are being who they're policing. All right. And in order to do that, we need to make it attractive. We need to raise it, but then we can put more parameters on them, making them whole liability insurance. My wife is a school social worker. She has to have a liability insurance. I have to have a liability insurance because I have federal customers, right? Make them have individual liability insurance. Make them have to live in the communities that they police. The whole thing with Daunte Wright is that the 40 of the 49 officers in Brooklyn Center, none of them live in the community that they police. So how are they going to know that Daunte's loved in that community? How do they know that he's typically not a bad apple? And yeah, he may have had a felony charge on some weed or something like that. But how would they not know if they don't live in the communities that police? So in order to increase this ability to look at someone as a human and to understand what the consequences are of taking the life of somebody from that community, we need more involvement in law enforcement from the communities that are being over-policed.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion, which really leads me to something else. Edward Woods, Woody. We know Woody. Some of you may or may not know him. He posted on Facebook, I think earlier this week or maybe last week, about what's needed to address this ongoing issue. And I kind of want to get you all thoughts on it because I think he gave some practical steps, and I think it's in line with kind of what you're saying, Carlin. So he talked about this idea of forming like a coalition with people in the community, churches, with the police, with the county sheriff, the police chief, right? And basically devise a strategy, what he calls SMART goals to strengthen police community relations, right? So to stop this idea of the proliferation of hate and abuse, and to foster a sense of community in the municipality, right? And so he's saying that actually getting a strategy developed that holds police accountable and that is voted and that has clear consequences if these things are violated. but also coupled with that, this notion of a partnership with community leaders and the police, et cetera, to where there is a sense of community that's being built. And he said something that stood out to me. He says, you're less likely to shoot a person that you know, that you have a relationship with, or at least seen. And so that was one way in which he was suggesting a way of dealing with what we're seeing with law enforcement in America. Any thoughts on that? Do you guys think that's feasible? What do you any light in that? Do you think that would help, or do you see something else that could help deal with that issue?
I think it's feasible in theory, but in practicality, I'm not too sure. And we've kind of had an example a couple of years ago. So in the last few last couple elections in Nashville, there was a motion to have a police accountability board. And when you look at the numbers, Nashville voted to have this. But then the state came and says, like, you know what? That's cool. You want to have police accountability, but you know what? You can have your group. You can talk about the issues, but you will not have any real authority to hold officers accountable in case anything happens. So I think it kind of it's a multifaceted approach. You have to have like grassroots efforts where you mobilize the community to vote, but then at the same time too, you also need to have people in the legislature too that says, you know what, like some of these stuff is not right. Case in point, like we want to talk, like some of the stuff goes back to education. It's just been announced that how much money the state owes TSU from its inception. So imagine, this is laws on the book that says, like, you know what, TSU is supposed to be a land grant institution, is supposed to get this money. But then the state was like, you know what? Yeah, even though that's the law, yeah, we're not going to give you the money. So, and this is coming from like the legislature. So I think you have to have some type of plan at every level. So you need somebody like putting pressure on the legislature, and then more representation in the legislature. Then you need also grassroots organization. You also need just even in between too, just doing different things. So it's, in theory, we can talk about we can hold officers accountable, but then if their systems are in place that prevent you from actually doing that, then you can only do so much.
Yeah. Anybody else? Any other thoughts?
I was just going to say, you have a legislature who did, and there's nothing wrong for people who haven't gone, but to college. But you have people in the legislature who do not have professional education, right? And that just goes to show that there are different types of people from different walks of life with different experiences who don't have to have this idea of a threshold of how we're going to run the state in power, in positions of power. And it kind of boggled my mind that, okay, I can graduate high school and I can go and be a state senator, or I can go and be a state house member, and I can do these things and stay in my community, and only stay in my community and not know about other people in other people's communities or other people. Like, there are people who vote in the Tennessee legislature who vote on bills who they've never heard about what the bill is. I mean, the legislature is only open for a few weeks out of the year. And then they vote on like hundreds, almost over 1,000 bills in that short amount of time. And so that just being said, that if you have people who are in the position of making these decisions, who are then talking about how we can prosecute police, how we can hold people accountable, how we can make sure things are equitable and governed with impunity, you're not going to have this level of accountability from all of the people within the state or in your city if only 5% of the people are voting on these people who make these decisions. And that level of disconnect with who is actually making decision is what is our downfall, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, I agree. Anyone else want to add to that? Any comments to that? And we're probably gonna get a wrap up here shortly. When I think about just kind of where we are, and I think that there's obviously a boots on the ground kind of action. How do we get people more engaged and know what's happening there? You know what I mean? And I think that, we need people that are Christians, that are actively engaged. And for me, it's not just, it's a humanity issue. It's a salvation issue. It's like, what God is trying to do in the lives of people in the world, and so what role do you guys think Christians play, and, in this process, in this time, in this world? How do we live out our faith, during this time as we engage these different issues in our society?
So we have the opportunity to be the glue, like that kind of like that's in all aspects. So like you look in the Bible, if you've seen people who affected change, like because they were in the legislature, you had people who affected change because they were close to the legislature. Then you also had people that's all like, based on just doing their little random actions in life, then they were able to affect change too. So I think that we have to be willing to do whatever we can in whatever capacity. So if it's like, like God moves somebody, it's like, go run for office. You get the office, then you go do what you got to do. Or you may not run for office, but somebody who's in office, and it's like, what you're doing and what you're saying is not really right, or it's not really helpful, like to other people. Consider it this way. And then there's other people too who maybe moves like, I'm just going to go out here and just start working, and then whoever wants to jump on board, they can jump on board. And then go from there. So I think as Christians, I guess we just have to be willing to act when we're called to do something, and then move into whatever position it is.
Yeah.
What was your question again?
Just in terms of Christians, what role do we play? How do we, in this time, how can we, impact, this issue in America?
Okay, this might sound a little generic, but I mean, hey, this is what is stated in the Bible. But honestly, it all boils down to the love that we have for God and the love that we have for ourselves and for other people. No matter what these people look like, where they come from, what languages they speak, whether they look like they're from the hood or somewhere else. It doesn't matter. It all boils down to our love. And so if we just, all of us have to get to the place where we're able to somehow remove the hatred in our hearts for other people. And I feel like once we do that, once our relationship with God grows or matures or whatnot, then we'll be able to love people for the way that He sees us, right? If we recognize the love that He has for us, then we'll treat other people the way that He loves us. So
yeah. Okay. No. I appreciate that. Go ahead, Robert.
I think I would say is we need to, I think, be honest with people. Currently within, I guess, my age group, we don't like canned answers or canned feelings or things like that. We want like an honest connection with someone. We want an honest, practical response. And if you don't have one, it's very respectful to hear someone say, I don't know. And so as Christians, if we can say, this is a practical way that I can be here for you, this is a practical way that you can go about this, or this is a practical experience that I've had myself, that reaches people very intimately. And if I don't have those practical things, being able to say, you know what, I don't know. I don't have an answer for you, and I don't know how to help you with this problem, but I will be here for you, and I can try to help you in any way I can. That type of honesty kind of like takes away the perception that Christians are only trying to get to the means of the end of catching a soul instead of just investing in the individual. And if we are willing to say that we don't have everything, but we can work to assist and be there and develop a relationship with you, then I think that works a long ways to let people have trust in you, to know that you're not trying to get some type of church goal, but you're really trying to invest in me as a person. And I've seen that to work the best with, like my peers, but I think honesty
Yeah.
and moving without the fear of saying I don't know sometimes are what I would suggest.
Yeah. And I think what I hear you guys saying, an honest engagement, just caring for people just because they're people and their issues and trying to come alongside of them, not having an ulterior motive, right, to get them in a church, to make them a part of your congregation. So yeah, I think, I've heard the term disinterested benevolence, this idea of engaging with people, not because you want something in return, only because you want to see them grow and develop, and as a person. And I mean, ultimately, we want them to experience Jesus, but we're not engaging. We allow the Lord to do that. We show our kindness to them and our willingness to be a part of that. So I agree with that. I think that, and I think what I'm also hearing too is that Christians being able to engage these issues that are so important to humanity today, and that we're all affected by it, affecting our communities, also is evidence that we're authentically seeking to engage with what's going on in our world. I think one of the challenges, with me, what I see with a lot of this, and maybe we'll close with this, and any comments if you want to respond, is I believe definitely we got to engage these issues, and try to bring about change, even legislatively, because I think there's so much at stake. But I also realize the limits of legislative laws. You know what I mean? Even when you have laws in place, you still have to deal with the people who are enacting the laws, or accountable to the laws, or not accountable to the laws, right? And so for me, it's like there's like a deeper root issue here that, how do we engage that and solve that? And I think part of the way we do that is being just really authentically Christian, and pray that witness, that influence will have an effect on that person's heart. Because that's really what is a heart change is going to really bring about this change that we're looking for on a wide scale level. And I'm not sure if in our world we can really expect that to happen, wholesale, just because of what sin is and what the world is, And so I think we work to engage and bring about the changes where we can and as much as we can. But then there's a hard issue that I think is also at play here, that somehow has to be addressed, and that the gospel addresses. Any thoughts on that, or any final comments? And kind of prepare to wrap up and close. Okay.
Yeah, I guess my question.
Huh?
I guess how do we use Jesus to reconcile the God of Abraham and the God of Moses, the God of deliverance and the God of God is my friend. Just because I guess we kind of go back to holy fear, and I guess looking at a perspective, that's just some of the differences, just to kind of bridge that gap between at least moving closer from a Christian standpoint, point of view, as to to bridge the gap together.
I don't know. I think it's more of an action thing. I think it's more than words. I think it's an action. Are we genuinely concerned with the whole person? So I think historically, as Christian or Seventh-day Adventists, we've only been concerned with, and I've said this before, with, hey, getting you in that baptismal pool. The whole public evangelistic meeting is about getting you to believe these certain things, and we're going to get you in here so you can be a part of our community. And I think that it's not working like it did in the past. You know what I'm saying? And it's not working with millennial generation, right? So I think that churches have to engage more holistically. How do you empower people in the community financially, providing them resources? How do you help them get educated? You know what I mean? And I think that, and we do the things feeding the poor. I think that has a more profound impact on the life of a person, more than what I can say to them. And there are cases where what you say matters. I'm not saying it doesn't matter, but I think that is one of the ways in which that speaks louder in a lot of ways. I think in our current generation, what's happening in the world, it's what are you going to do about this suffering in our world? Yeah. Well, if there aren't any final comments or thoughts for today, I want to thank you guys. This has been a rich conversation. I've grown. I always grow in these times, in my perspective and approach to the gospel. And I pray that those of you who are watching today that you've experienced some growth, that this has helped you in your journey and walk of faith and dealing and grappling with these issues that we're facing in our world. And so I just want to again thank our guest panelists today. And thank you all for joining us and watching. And until next time, next week, same time, same channel, we'll be back again for another edition of Afternoon Intersections.
Thank you for staying by for Afternoon Intersections. Until next time, may you continue to reflect, apply, and live Christ's words.